Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Moana 2 win the weekend up against Wicked, though it must be said that Wicked's daily numbers during the week are definitely making it so that the domestic totals between these two movies is really still up in the air quite a bit. Only about $20 million currently separates the two films and their total domestic grosses, with Wicked having a $20 million advantage, but Wicked also had a full week advantage on the release of Moana 2. So we'll go into those numbers to see what is the actual story going on in those day-to-day numbers and what I think will likely end up happening by the end of the run. Will the weekend numbers for Moana 2 and the families that are able to go out on the weekends, and especially as we get further into the holiday season, will that be enough? Or will Wicked be able to bring out tons and tons of people consistently throughout the rest of the month? Again, I think that we're going to have a very interesting final battle between these two, with Moana 2 likely taking the worldwide totals, whereas Wicked has a decent chance of being able to pull out a domestic victory. But we still have a lot of box office left to go, tons of things to happen. I've now seen both Moana 2 and Wicked, so I can now speak to both of those films a little bit more directly, which we'll get into in just a second. We also are going to talk about Gladiator 2 and how it continues to have this drop-off, and so even though people continue to try to put it in the conversation with the Moana 2 Wicked global phenomenon that box office has been, Gladiator 2 is just so far behind, I should say, both of those movies, where you really can't put them and put that specific movie in that actual conversation. Also, interestingly enough, we have right now the current numbers, and again, we're still waiting on some numbers to be released. I'll go ahead and update this in real time. As you can see, Interstellar's numbers for the weekend. That's right, Interstellar at 165 IMAX showings, IMAX screens, so a very limited IMAX run, was making $26,000 per screen. That's right, this film, after so many years after its initial release, getting only the IMAX release screens, is doing incredibly well and is actually possibly going to get the top 5 spots this weekend. Of course, we are still waiting on other numbers, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that ends up, because that's just impressive. No matter where it ends up, the fact that it has that per theater ratio and the fact that it's doing that well at that few screens shows you Interstellar very much still has a lot of fandom behind it, that Christopher Nolan still has a lot of love behind him, and just the power of those IMAX screens. So let's go ahead and dive into these numbers here. So Moana 2 taking the number 1 spot. This is something that most of us had predicted would actually happen after the holiday frame from last weekend, dropping 63%. So again, a little bit on the higher end there, probably because of the fact that last weekend was so much higher with those holiday numbers coming in. So very, very strong hold here for a movie like this, right? If this had been a more traditional box office opening, this would be something to concern them with. But seeing as it had a pretty massive Monday drop-off, was able to recover on Tuesday, Wednesday, and throughout the rest of the week, Moana 2 is still very much on track to have a very good domestic run, even though the movie is not all that great. I gave it a meh decent score over on Critic List. Go check out my Critic List if you want to find out full thoughts and full reviews on any of the films that I talk about that I mentioned that I've actually seen. And Moana 2 is just that middle of the road. It's kind of like a Frozen 2, where the movie really isn't all that good, but because it has some of those elements that, throw back to the original, and Moana 2 is completely just derivative of the first film in so many ways. Even the songs themselves, as they are written, are just complete derivatives of the previous songs from the last movie, just kind of reminding us of, hey, remember how dynamic that first movie was and how successful that first movie was? Memba? Well, guess what? Moana 2 is able to get those member berries working really, really strongly. And so this is one of those cases where, hey, the member berries are actually working, but it's not that great of a film. Whereas on the other hand, with Wicked, this movie, it has some problems with it, its runtime being a huge part of it, but clearly the audiences are still eating it up. And when the theater I went to, just again, after a few weeks of its initial release, we were waiting for on a screen last night in order to get in. I was going with my wife, and ultimately what happened was we had to wait because they were cleaning the screen. It took them up until showtime to finish cleaning the actual screen because it had been so packed. And then when we got in there, it was like a mad rush to the seats because it was a smaller theater with reclining seats. And sure enough, that theater was almost completely packed. So the fact that a 6 p.m. showing on a Saturday was able to do something like that, and this is a theater, by the way, that has a very low volume meaning not a lot of people go to this theater. It's a very low volume theater. I'm honestly surprised it is still going. It is still going on, but it also makes sense as to why this theater I've often had problems with because of, bulbs being clearly dead or dying in theaters with blinking screens. Luckily, their more premium screens seem to be a lot better, and sure enough, this one definitely was on that same page. But still, Wicked doing very well, and overall as a movie, a heck of a lot better than Moana 2. Still very long, still has a lot of problems, of course, and I mentioned all the issues that I have with it in my review, but still a pretty rad movie overall that I think is going to be able to bring a lot of people out there. And it really has less to do with the movie and more to do with the musical it's based on. Wicked is a really good show. It has really good music. And this is not because of the movie. This is because of what was written, over a decade ago at this point in the actual musical score for the movie. And it just, again, has those earworms in there. Those songs that just stick with you. Is dig into your mind. And I think that is the reason why this film is being so successful. Less about the movie itself and more about that. And you add on top of that good performances from the lead actresses, even though the lead actresses are completely insane and need a lot of help, who just need a lot of really, really, really good help. Probably not from a modern, healthcare system by any means, but they definitely need some help. If you've watched those interviews, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're trying to turn those into essentially therapy sessions, and that's just not normal. So Wicked, again, even with that being the case, they are still very good. I mean, both of them sing very, very well, and both of them act the parts incredibly well as well. And so Wicked is much better of the two films, which is why I think between this battle, right, in this battle, I think ultimately Moana 2 is going to win out. If we go to the global numbers here, we can kind of showcase this. Right now, Moana 2 is at $600 million as of the recording of this video. That means the film is right now on pace, where an average typical release for a movie that has a $600 million 2-week total means $1 billion. So Moana 2 is still very, 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 very much on track to hit $1 billion. I think it'll be able to do so. And look at this split as well, right? 300 million domestic and 300 million international. So we can expect a lot more to come from those international numbers and continue to see more domestically as we, again, go further into the holiday frame. A lot of schools have only 1 week of classes left and then have exams, at least in the case of my own situation, because we're very close to Christmas time. And so Moana 2 is going to be one of those films. Wicked as well, also going to be one of those films that's going to drive people out consistently over and over again. But especially when you have a lot of parents that have maybe been waiting for the fuller holiday of Christmas versus that of Thanksgiving, this might actually be that case. And this might actually be the situation where Moana 2 can even leg out beyond Christmas, especially not a whole lot of other films coming out in this space that will do any real competition up against it. And again, word of mouth seems to be pretty strong on this movie, despite the fact the film has gotten very middling reviews, at least from the people in the criticalist space and just, again, general people like on, Jeremy Johns and others. Like, it's fine. It's okay, but it's nothing to write home about. It's something that clearly was a cash grab opportunity. And sure enough, they're going to be making a lot of money from that movie. We'll go further into those comparisons between the two. We can actually look and see for something very interesting. And so basically, as I think that Moana 2 is going to take that international take, right, of $600 million, it's going to get over $1 billion, whereas Wicked probably will cap out somewhere in like the 800, maybe $700 to $800 million territory. I think is honestly in the situation. We'll go further into that when we go into the charting. The big difference is that even though it has the edge domestically, remember, it's only a week advantage on Moana 2, and Moana 2 is catching up, it seems, with these weekend numbers, whereas the internationals is where Wicked is just not performing as well. It's still performing good, right? So people who said, it's going to just bomb internationally, it's not bombing internationally. It's just not going to meet and match the success of a film like Moana 2 or some of the other, larger films, larger international presence movies that are out there. So this is still doing well internationally, but it's just not going to do as well. It's going to make probably half of the international take, if not even less, of what Moana 2 is currently going to be making. And that is the reason why I think ultimately this film will not make $1 billion in Wicked, but domestically it has a good chance of actually being able to take the domestic numbered cake. Now, as I mentioned, right, the weekend numbers clearly show Moana 2 with the advantage, but let's go to the daily numbers here, right? So if we just go back to last Thursday, just a few days ago, right, Wicked had the number one spot. If we go back to the Wednesday, Wicked took the number one spot, not by a whole lot, but still by quite, still by enough. Moana 2, the only weekday it won was the Discount Tuesday, which makes a lot of sense because that's Discount Tuesday, but even then, again, not by a whole lot. As you can see, Moana 2 also took that first Monday as well, but only by $200,000. And so basically the reason why I point out specifically that Wednesday, Thursday is because as you see further out into the week, Wicked starts to do a lot better. And I think that is kind of a sign of the long-term trend where I think Wicked will probably end up beating Moana 2 on more days than not, especially as we get closer to the holiday frame. Once the holiday frame hits, that could, potentially even flip. But once you get into the weekend, that's when the story begins to change, right? 11.7 up against Wicked's 9.5, 23 versus the 15 million for Wicked on Saturdays. I think Saturdays are almost always going to go to Moana 2 because that is the day for families to get out. And then also on Sundays, 17 to 10, another day. And so I think you could see maybe Wicked Moana going back and forth on that Friday and on those Friday numbers, because it's not a huge difference separating them on that Friday numbers. And remembering that this has an extra 5 days of release, that's still very impressive for Wicked. If we actually compare the two movies, as you can see, at the same point of release, Wicked was at $263 million, but was making more in those day-to-day numbers, all right? So that is something to keep into account. Now, this had a much stronger showing up front because Moana 2 had that, that Thanksgiving frame to go off of, and that's why we see such a huge advantage there, 225 by the end of the first Sunday versus 112. But the fact that, Wicked is still very much right up against it at this point in time shows us that, hey, these daily numbers going on for Wicked are very strong, right? At the first Monday for Moana 2 is at 5. The first Monday for Wicked, when it first came out, was 15. All right, we're not going to see those kinds of daily numbers for Moana 2 probably anytime soon, if not ever, because yes, it will do well into the holiday frame, but maybe not that necessarily well day-to-day numbers, because at that point, you just have a film that's been out for such a long time. Again, that's just the law of diminishing returns. Over time, films make less money. So the question really is Moana 2's weekend numbers going to be able to beat the weekday numbers of Wicked? And I think ultimately, if I had to put money on it, I would say Moana 2 will probably still end up winning the domestic release total battle, only because of those weekends, because those family numbers can really drive up the ticket sales quite a bit more. Wicked is going to be very close behind it, though, and I would not be surprised to see if it was within 10, 15, 20 million dollars either way. But right now, I think the edge is with Moana 2 just because of how much it made up front and how well it's doing on the weekends specifically versus that, right? If we go to the first, the first weekend again, the follow-up weekend, right? $31 million for the follow-up weekend of Wicked, right? This is where it was at that point of release. The second Friday numbers there, $11.7 million, 29 versus 20. So as you can see, actually, if you look at even that number, that's very impressive for Wicked. Again, it had a much stronger hold in those weekend numbers. But now that we're going into this later frame, this is where I think Moana 2 is going to start to take a little bit more of an advantage, because as the weeks go on, I think ultimately Moana 2 is just going to have that edge. We'll see what happens, though. Again, do not count out Wicked. Wicked could easily still beat and win the domestic battle, because it does still have a $20 million advantage, and anything could happen at this point in time. Worldwide, though, it's going to go to Moana 2, and Moana 2 is going to be $1 billion film, whereas Wicked is not going to get there. But is still going to do quite well nonetheless. Gladiator 2 at $368 million, still a massive flop because of its massive budget. Y2K, a new release that no one saw, $2.1 million domestically, around a $15 million projected budget. Again, probably not going to make any money for that Rachel Zegler film. Now, we can make some projections now. We have the weekend 2 numbers for Moana 2. Do keep in mind that these include a holiday frame opening weekend, so these numbers could easily change. We are going into the holiday frame, though, and so something tells me there's a chance that these numbers will likely still hold, that this film will do basically a historical average, right? We'll go between either doubling its amount of money or having the first 2 weekends account for 70% of its box office. That's what most films do on average. They fall somewhere in that range. So based off of that, we can project in a worst case scenario, getting the film to $857 million with a best case scenario of $1.2 billion. And that would mean that an average, completely average release would be around $1 billion, a little over that. I think that $1 billion is absolutely on the table. I do think, though, there's a good chance that because this film is not nearly as loved as another animated film from this year in Inside Out 2, I think Inside Out 2 might actually be safe in being able to keep the top spot of the worldwide charts, right? 1.5, I believe, is what that film got. $1 billion. I think that will probably be safe from Moana 2. There was a good chance early on with those, especially that huge opening, where it had the potential to beat it, right? Because we talked about the opening weekend differences between Inside Out 2 versus that of Moana 2. But let's see, the $600 million total global opening. Let's go ahead and see if we can compare that to where Inside Out 2 was at the same point of its release to get a better idea of where these things happen. And of course, I trying to find it here on my chart, because we love charts here on OMB Reviews, but sometimes my eyes don't see very well. All right, there it is. So even though the advantage worldwide opening weekend wise seemed to be in the camp of Moana 2, right? $389 million. But again, that's a 5-day opening versus the $294 million 3-day total of Inside Out 2. $724 million is where that film ended up. by the end of its second 2 weeks. And so as you can see, now it's over $100 million behind that. So that's why I do not think that Moana 2 is going to be able to beat that film out, but it's still going to do well. And I think $1 billion is absolutely on the table. Money-wise, that means we're talking about gains of anywhere between $289 to almost $500 million in net gain profits for this movie. So very impressive stuff there right now. Interestingly enough, it's still at about $1 million in the red. And again, it's because it, projected right now to have had about $150 million budget. So based off of that, it means to make around $375 million to break even. In a typical 2.5 multiplier chart. So that's why if you look at the columns here, it's made $54 million according to the traditional, but we know that most films these days need about 3 times their budget because, hey, that's still a lot of money overseas. They don't get a lot of that. They get 40% of that box office, whereas they get 55% of the domestic box office these days, and only about 25% of the China box office. And so that's why that film is still at the negative number there, and why it still needs to make a little bit more to break even, but it's going to do that very easily, probably in the next day or two, and it's going to just, again, run to the races after that because it still has a lot of money left to be made at this point in time. Gladiator 2, still a massive flop, even though the film has done okay. $338 million, a lot more than anyone would have suspected, but because a huge portion of that is international audience, it's not going to make up its roughly $230 million budget there. Wicked, this film still around $98 million in the red. And the reason why it is still currently in the red is because of a massive marketing campaign. Now, here is the thing, all right? No one on this channel is going to be talking about this alleged $300+ million in partnership campaigns, all right? Because the problem with those numbers is that they're falsely being presented as actual marketing spend. What this film actually spent was still quite a bit of money. It spent roughly $150 million on actual marketing in addition to its budget. So that means a total spend of around $300 million as of just before the movie actually came out. And so because of that, that's the number it needs to make back. And again, remembering it only gets 55% domestic, 40% international, that's the reason why, as of right now, even though it's done really, really well and made over $400 million, almost $400 million worldwide, again, based off of the current numbers as they stand, right? Actually, sorry, these numbers are out of date. I almost forgot that when it comes to the numbers.com, and this is why I hate and cannot stand boxofficemojo.com, because they never update their numbers in real time. And that's why you also see here, this says 465 instead of $600 million. And so, again, basing this instead off of $455 million, I can say as of right now, chances are the film has, probably made its money back. In fact, we'll do this live, okay? We love doing things live here on OMB Reviews. I like it because it keeps me honest. So let's just go ahead and just throw these in pretty roughly at this point. Let's see, this is up to $320 million there, so that cuts in quite a bit into those numbers. So it looks like it'll probably actually still be in the red, but by not nearly as much as what was previously expected. So let's now put in these numbers here, $135 million, boom. And then obviously $7 million from China, and that gets very little, but that's such a little difference there. It's not going to make too much of a difference. So even at $455 million, again, that is now a correct number there. You're still at around $70 million in the red. So if any of these other numbers up here are not correct, that is the reason why. So this film, Moana 2, has actually started to make its money back. And again, that's not really all that surprising. As I mentioned before, it's well past that point at this point in time. But Wicked, $69 million in the red, is because of $150 million in marketing budget. This film is still going to make its money back. It's still going to make a lot of profit. And those partnership deals outside of the theatrical release are also going to bring a lot of revenue for this movie also. But yeah, it still does need to be said that all of the false information there about it spending $300 million extra on marketing deals and partnerships, again, it did obviously create partnerships that were valued at $300 million, but that means that the people behind Wicked put up something, the people behind the Target and the other, merchandising ventures put up something. So it's an equal partnership, and we don't know exactly the terms of those deals. So how much did each person spend? Was there any actual money changing hands? Was it something where they simply agreed, hey, you can license our stuff for free, but we get a cut of the profits? Those are things that we just don't have information on. We don't have access to that information, but ultimately that means it's still going to be profits. All right. That's going to be the name of the game for Wicked, is just nonstop profits. And the movie is doing well enough domestically and internationally. And now you add on top of that merchandising, it's going to be just fine. It's probably have made already this money back that it hasn't made up. But I am just a box office guy, so I will stick with the numbers as they currently stand. And as of right now, Wicked still has not made its money back, but that will change very, very quickly, as it is still doing really well. But those are numbers. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Again, worldwide numbers right now. Moana 2, $600 million worldwide versus Wicked's $455 million worldwide. So that's the reason why Moana 2 tracking that much further ahead, because of those international numbers. That's why $1 billion is very much on the table for that movie. Whereas when it comes to Wicked, $1 billion really isn't on the table. But I do expect this film to still do very, very well. Those initial projections I had for this movie was that it would be between $514 and $720 million worldwide. And I do think that those numbers will probably be broken. I think that this is a chart-breaking type of movie. As you can see, just even in those more, those more accurate weekend numbers there. Let's see, the weekend numbers. The fact that it's still dropping 57% after a holiday frame is still very impressive. But what are y'all's thoughts about this? Have you seen either Moana 2, which in my opinion is just decent? It's really forgettable. There's no memorable moments of the film. It's not really offensive in any way, but it also doesn't add anything to the franchise. It's just a clear money grab at this point. Whereas Wicked, I think it has a lot more enjoyment and a lot more entertainment value, but also I still have some issues with nonetheless, but it's overall a pretty rad movie. What are y'all's thoughts on both of those movies? If you've seen them, let me know in the comment section below. Also, what do you think is going to win? Do you think that Wicked is going to win the domestic, whereas Moana is going to win international and worldwide? I think at this point, there's no doubt that Moana 2 is going to win those global battles. There's just no way for Wicked to catch up because of that international advantage. But that domestic battle is interesting. Let me know your thoughts about that. Anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Allow that fire button over in Aussie. Smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much for putting up with my nonsense as always. And I do apologize for those numbers not being up to date in the chart, but I was glad I was able to fix that in real time. Keeps me honest here on the channel. Have a blessed feast of the Immaculate Conception. And as always, God bless. Now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribe Star people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And also to the K-Man. Check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.